My name is Maya Ellison, and for a long time, I did not officially exist. That sounds dramatic, but it is the most accurate way I can describe those years. I paid taxes. I rented apartments. I showed up in databases where anonymity is mandatory. But in the places where credit, ownership, and legacy are recorded, I was absent. And the absence was intentional. If you had searched for me during the height of Helix Core's rise, you would have found almost nothing. A few outdated conference photos where I stood just outside the frame. A LinkedIn profile that looked inactive, frozen in time. No interviews. No patents. No press. Meanwhile, the company I helped build from nothing was being praised as revolutionary. Financial magazines called it disruptive. Investors called it brilliant. Governments quietly integrated its systems. And at every podium, on every stage, one man stood alone and accepted the applause. Daniel Ross. Daniel and I met long before money entered the conversation. Back when success meant paying rent on time and ambition meant working until exhaustion felt normal. We shared a co-working space that smelled like burned coffee and cheap cleaning chemicals. I had a folding desk. He had a better chair and better social instincts. I was the systems architect. I had always been one. I thought in structures, dependencies, and edge cases. I saw systems as living things, shaped by incentives and fragile under neglect. Daniel was different. He was articulate. Convincing. He understood how to make people feel included in a vision they didn't fully grasp. Together, we worked because our skills didn't overlap. They complemented. Helix Core began as a prototype I built to solve a very specific problem. Financial institutions were drowning in fragmented compliance systems that reacted after damage occurred. I wanted to build something predictive. A system that could model risk before it manifested. A platform that could see patterns humans missed. Daniel saw something else. A story. He convinced me to turn my prototype into a company. I resisted at first. I didn't trust scale. I didn't trust investors. But Daniel believed deeply in expansion, and I believed deeply in the work. Eventually, I agreed. The early days were brutal and honest. Long nights. Endless revisions. Failed demos. Daniel slept on office couches. I slept under my desk more than once. When we landed our first major client, we celebrated with takeout and exhaustion. I never wanted to be the face of Helix Core. Public attention felt inefficient to me. Daniel loved it. So we fell into roles naturally. He handled pitches, networking, and investor meetings. I built the systems that made the pitches real. As Helix Core grew, the imbalance began quietly. Daniel's name appeared on documents more often. His signature replaced mine on proposals. He told me it was cleaner that way. Easier for investors to understand a single leader. I didn't object. That was my second mistake. The first was trusting him. The second was believing silence equaled safety. The restructuring happened during a period of rapid expansion. Institutional investors were circling. Lawyers were everywhere. Contracts multiplied faster than I could read them. Daniel assured me it was all standard. That everyone had to sign the same paperwork. I remember the night clearly. It was late. I was exhausted from debugging a compliance module that refused to behave. Daniel dropped the documents on my desk with a smile that looked familiar but felt different. "This is just to formalize things," he said. "You know how legal is." I skimmed. I signed. 3 weeks later, my system permissions changed. Certain repositories were suddenly restricted. I assumed it was an error. Then access disappeared entirely. When I asked Daniel, he said IT was handling it. HR scheduled a meeting the next day. They used words like streamlining and redundancy. They said my role overlapped with external vendors now. They said the company was evolving. Daniel didn't attend. When I cleared my desk, no one met my eyes. Helix Core went public 6 months later. Daniel rang the opening bell. Articles described him as a visionary founder who had built proprietary financial intelligence systems from the ground up. He talked about innovation, leadership, and ethical responsibility. The code he described was mine. I contacted lawyers. They were polite and grim. The documents I signed transferred ownership completely. The language was airtight. It didn't matter who built the systems. Helix Core owned them. Daniel controlled Helix Core. Legally, I was erased. That was when I stopped reacting and started thinking. I had always documented my work obsessively. Version histories. Development logs. Mathematical signatures unique to my methods. Not because I planned revenge, but because I distrusted memory and authority equally. I pulled everything together. Emails where Daniel asked me to simplify explanations so investors wouldn't ask too many questions. Recordings where I warned about a vulnerability in the system's compliance layer. Notes from meetings where he dismissed my concerns as overcautious. That vulnerability haunted me. It wasn't a bug. It was a consequence. The system prioritized speed and profitability. Under certain conditions, it would flag suspicious activity but downgrade its severity automatically. It created plausible ignorance. I told Daniel it could be exploited. He told me it would cost us clients. When I refused to ignore it, the tone between us changed. Meetings shortened. Decisions were made without me. Then came the restructuring. He didn't remove me because I was unnecessary. He removed me because I was dangerous. For 6 years, I disappeared publicly and worked privately. I took consulting jobs under different names. I studied intellectual property law, corporate litigation, and regulatory frameworks. I learned how systems fail not because they are broken, but because people design them to look functional while hiding risk. I watched Helix Core grow. I watched Daniel sell off pieces of my work for staggering amounts of money. I watched him testify confidently before panels, explaining architecture he didn't understand. I watched regulators praise Helix Core's compliance systems while unknowingly relying on the vulnerability I had flagged years earlier. When I finally filed the lawsuit, it wasn't dramatic. No press. No warning. Just a precise, documented correction. The market reacted instantly. Helix Core's stock halted. Regulators took notice. Clients demanded answers. Daniel called me that evening. "You're making a mistake," he said. "No," I told him calmly. "I'm correcting one." And that was when everything truly began. Once the lawsuit became public, the silence around me shattered. For years, I had been invisible by design. Now my name appeared in legal briefings, financial alerts, and private conversations I would never hear. The story didn't break in the press the way scandals usually do. It rippled through systems instead. Trading desks froze. Compliance teams escalated. Lawyers stopped sleeping. Daniel didn't call again after that first conversation. His attorneys did. They spoke with rehearsed politeness, implying misunderstanding, then escalation, then consequences. They suggested mediation. They hinted at settlements generous enough to tempt most people. I declined every offer. The discovery phase was where the truth began to surface in ways Daniel hadn't anticipated. He believed complexity would protect him. He believed no one would take the time to untangle years of layered architecture and internal communication. He underestimated the one thing that had always been my strength. Patience. Every deposition was recorded. Every question precise. When Daniel was asked to explain the system's core logic, he defaulted to vision statements and market positioning. He spoke confidently, but confidence is not clarity. When pressed for technical specifics, he deferred to unnamed engineers. My attorney placed my original system diagrams in front of him. "Can you explain this process flow?" she asked. Daniel hesitated. His eyes scanned the page the way someone looks at a foreign language they recognize but never learned to speak. He tried to pivot, to frame the design as collaborative. The problem was that collaboration leaves traces. Emails surfaced where he explicitly admitted he didn't understand the system but trusted me to handle it. Messages where he pushed for accelerated deployment despite unresolved risks. Notes from meetings where he asked legal to minimize my visibility in documentation. Independent experts examined the codebase. They identified structural patterns unique to my methodology. Not copied. Not inspired. Identical. Helix Core's defense shifted. They stopped arguing ownership and started arguing relevance. They claimed my contributions were foundational but outdated. That the current system had evolved beyond my involvement. So we demonstrated what happened when my architecture was removed. The system failed quietly at first. Then catastrophically. Dependencies collapsed. Risk assessments returned nonsense. Compliance checks contradicted themselves. Regulators took notice. That was when the vulnerability resurfaced. Internal audits triggered alerts that matched the exact behavior I had warned about years earlier. Transactions flagged but downgraded. Suspicious flows smoothed over by automated logic designed to prioritize throughput. Someone asked Daniel under oath why the issue had never been addressed. He said it was theoretical. Someone else presented evidence showing it had been exploited repeatedly. The room changed. Helix Core's board convened emergency meetings without Daniel present. Investors demanded explanations he couldn't give. Regulators expanded their inquiries. Daniel's narrative began to fracture. He positioned himself as a visionary betrayed by technical subordinates who failed to communicate risk properly. That illusion lasted until my emails were entered into the record. Emails where I explained the vulnerability in detail. Where I recommended halting deployment. Where he dismissed the concern explicitly because it might scare investors. He didn't misunderstand the risk. He accepted it. The board removed him within days, citing fiduciary concerns. His shares were frozen pending investigation. Public statements spoke of values and accountability while carefully avoiding his name. Behind the scenes, pressure intensified. Anonymous complaints appeared against me. Claims that my consulting work violated non-compete agreements that no longer existed. Threats disguised as legal inquiries. I changed apartments. Changed routines. Reduced my digital footprint. I wasn't paranoid. I was experienced. Then came the settlement offers. Not from Helix Core, but from intermediaries. Representatives of investment groups whose names never appeared publicly. They spoke calmly, as if this were a negotiation between equals. "You've made your point," one of them said during a discreet meeting. "There's no need to take this further." "There is," I replied. They warned me about market instability. About job losses. About unintended consequences. I reminded them that systems designed to hide wrongdoing always collapse eventually. I was simply accelerating the timeline. The real turning point came from someone I hadn't expected. A junior compliance analyst from a Helix Core subsidiary reached out anonymously. She said she recognized my name from internal documents. She said she had been instructed to downgrade alerts manually, without explanation. She said it didn't feel right. Her evidence was meticulous. Logs. Internal directives. Communication chains leading back to executive decisions. It wasn't negligence. It was policy. When regulators received that information, the case transformed. What began as an intellectual property dispute became a criminal investigation. Daniel was arrested quietly early one morning. No press. No spectacle. Just a car outside his home and a door closing behind him. Helix Core unraveled quickly after that. Clients fled. Partners sued. The company's valuation collapsed. Within a year, it ceased to exist. I was offered money again. Large amounts. Enough to disappear comfortably forever. I refused. Because erasure had already been tried once. Years later, I thought the story was over. It wasn't. An encrypted message reached me through channels I hadn't used in years. It contained a data dump and a single line. You were right to worry. The data revealed a platform far larger than Helix Core. Government contracts. Global reach. The same architectural philosophy. The same deliberate blindness. And my name. Someone had placed me on their advisory board without consent. A shell biography. Outdated credentials. Enough to imply endorsement. If the platform collapsed, I would be implicated. If it survived, my silence would legitimize it. They weren't threatening me. They were daring me. I could have walked away. I had already paid enough. I had already corrected one system. But power doesn't disappear. It migrates. So I stepped forward again. Not with lawsuits. With exposure. I assembled a team quietly. Engineers who had been burned. Former regulators who no longer needed permission. We audited the platform without announcing ourselves. What we found confirmed everything. The exploit was intentional. Designed to detect wrongdoing but ignore it unless politically convenient. Plausible ignorance made operational. We documented it thoroughly. Then we released it to everyone at once. Governments. Oversight bodies. Clients. No exclusives. No spin. The platform collapsed under its own weight. When questions turned toward me, I answered directly. I never consented to this association. I warned against this design years ago. Here is the proof. This time, no one argued. Years later, I teach now. Quietly. I help design systems meant to resist abuse. My name appears in places that matter, even if they aren't loud. Daniel Ross no longer exists in the world he built. And I no longer exist in the shadow he tried to leave me in. I reclaimed my name. And that was always the point. I thought after the second collapse, after the platform fell apart under regulatory pressure and public scrutiny, that something inside me would finally relax. That the constant vigilance I had lived with for more than a decade would fade. Instead, what changed was not my alertness, but my understanding of it. I stopped seeing vigilance as a burden. I started seeing it as a responsibility. In the months that followed, my name circulated again, this time without distortion. Invitations arrived from regulatory agencies, universities, and oversight committees. I declined most of them. I accepted a few, selectively, carefully. I had learned the cost of visibility, but I had also learned the cost of silence. Teaching came almost by accident. A former regulator asked me to guest lecture on systemic risk. I expected a small group of tired professionals. Instead, the room was full. Young engineers, policy students, auditors. People who hadn't yet learned how easily good intentions could be bent. I didn't tell them my story directly. I talked about incentives. About how systems don't fail when they break, they fail when they succeed at the wrong goals. I showed them anonymized diagrams. I walked them through decisions that looked harmless in isolation and catastrophic in aggregate. They listened. Afterward, a student approached me and asked how to protect themselves if they ever found themselves inside a company doing something wrong. I told them to document everything. Not because they would need revenge, but because truth decays without records. I live quietly now. Intentionally. My work is slower, more deliberate. I consult on systems where transparency is treated as a feature, not a threat. I design architectures that assume bad actors will exist and plan for them rather than pretending they won't. Every so often, I hear Daniel Ross's name mentioned in passing. Usually as a cautionary example. A once celebrated founder who fell from grace. Someone who mistook ownership for understanding and control for immunity. I don't follow his life closely. I don't need to. The last time I saw him in person was years ago, in a courtroom hallway. He looked older than I expected. Smaller. He didn't speak to me. He didn't need to. Everything that mattered had already been said in documents and testimony. As he passed, I realized something surprising. I didn't feel anger. I felt closure. People like Daniel often believe their downfall comes from betrayal. They never understand that it comes from accumulation. Every ignored warning. Every shortcut justified. Every voice silenced because it was inconvenient. Revenge stories tend to end with spectacle. Explosions. Public humiliation. A final confrontation that feels cinematic. Real revenge is quieter. It's the slow correction of a record. It's the moment when the narrative no longer bends around the powerful. It's the permanence of documentation. I reclaimed my name not by shouting, but by proving. I didn't destroy Daniel Ross. He built a system that destroyed itself, and I refused to be erased by it. That difference matters. Because somewhere right now, another Maya is being told to stay quiet. To trust the process. To sign the paperwork. Somewhere, another Daniel is convincing himself that competence can be replaced with confidence. I hope this story reaches them. Not as a warning. As a reminder. Systems remember. And so do I.